And I stayed for 2 years in the rainforest in the community of Fiegel. I went thinking I was just going to do a pre-doctoral research project for anthropology at the University of Chicago, and that I would go there and I would study these folks and I would write down lots of notes and I would come out and write that into a dissertation, and that would be a research project. And in fact, my 2 years with the Teduray in the forest changed my life completely. It just had a tremendous impact on me and the way I see the world and the way I understand life to be lived. On the big northern island, flew into Manila, and from there we took another plane all the way down to Cotabato City, which is on the big island, the big southern island of Mindanao. And Cotabato City is sort of the gateway into the Teduray Mountains, which are these hills to the south. We took a truck up this road to Upi right here, which is a very bad road, but which is passable at least when it's not too rainy. And from Upi, it's just a few miles to Mirab, where we built the house for Audrey and the boys to stay in while I went into the forest. On one occasion, Audrey and my two sons hiked all the way into Fiegel. It was a big, big job to get them in there, and they stayed for a few days and then left. But it was good because they wanted to see the place where I was spending 2 years of my life, and the people of Fiegel were very interested to meet Lenny. They called me Mo Lenny, father of Lenny, and Idung Lenny, mother of Lenny. They wanted to meet her, and Lum, we called him, the other little boy. The family came in, they had a wonderful time, and then they left, and I went with them. And then when I was coming back, Len asked if he could come and just stay with me for a couple months. And Audrey and I talked about it and decided that that would be all right, that'd be fine. And so Lenny and I hiked into the forest. Well, the day we got into Fiegel, at the end of this long trip, it rained very, very hard. And the Dakeltron, the big river that runs through the forest there, that Fiegel is alongside and that you cross so often, couldn't be crossed because it was flooded and rushing at tremendous, much more deep than it usually was because of the rains, and much more rapid. Well, that night Len got sick, and as the night went on, his fever got higher and higher, and I became very worried about him. And in the morning when we woke up, he was still very, very sick and had in a way lost control of his bowels and his urine, and I was afraid he might be dying. So I talked to the Teduray people as they were waking up in that morning. They knew that what I really wanted was that he would go to my kind of doctor, which was down along the coast. The trouble, and now in their view, what he needed was for a shaman to go to the spirit world and find out who Lenny had offended, what spirit Lenny had offended, somehow inadvertently, and fix the problem and come back and he would be cured. But they knew that I had some kind of a doctor that did things they have no idea, and they knew I wanted him to go to my kind of doctor. So they organized a group that carried Len out of the forest. Now, because the river was so flooded, they couldn't cross it. They had to go down its banks, and so they traveled for all day and night to get Lenny there. It took 20-some hours to get Len down to the coast, and carried him in a hammock, or a kind of litter that was made by putting a sarong through two bamboo poles. And I tailed along trying to keep up with these people, and it was a horrendous trip and a very dangerous trip. These people literally risked their lives along that rushing river, trying to get Lenny down to the doctor. And we did. We got him to the doctor, and it turned out that he had a kind of virulent flu that was not really dangerous, but that had terrible symptoms.
So they gave you a good gallbladder?
They gave me a good gallbladder. They had done this thing at great risk to themselves for a goal which was not theirs at all, but was mine. And it was such a good example of Teduray culture at work. He'd offended a spirit. So while we were carrying him out, the shaman in Fiegel went to the spirit world to cure him. And he got better. This is the community of Fiegel. It's about 14 hours hike from the nearest road. Fiegel is the central hamlet of a neighborhood of about 7 hamlets like that are 10 to 15, 20 minutes hike from Fiegel in the forest. What makes those 7 hamlets into a particular, what I call a neighborhood, is that they work together. The men and women of a neighborhood all work together in the process of swidden horticulture. This is a way of cutting the forest down, small portions of the forest, making fields which they then plant with a great variety of crops. It's not monocropping at all. A great variety of rice, corn, all sorts of vegetables, fruits, legumes, root crops, all sorts of things. Medicines are planted. Well, the process of doing this starts with clearing a patch of the forest. And since the hard work of preparing a swidden is more than any one family can do, all the men in the neighborhood work together on one on one swidden first. Then the next day they go to the next families and they do that, and the next, then the next, until they've gone through all the swiddens of each family in the neighborhood. Then they go back and start again with the next stage. The first stage is cutting. Here you see a swidden that has been cut, slashed, and then cut, and then burned. And now they're going to come through all the men and women and plant it. This is a swidden ready for planting, so you can see how different this is than Kansas corn farming or something. After a year, they go somewhere else, and they don't come back to that place for a long, long time, so that it's had time to regrow into forest. After the swidden grows for a while, the women will go almost every day or every other day to weed, and this is a group of women on their way to swiddens to do communal weeding in the plots. This is a woman called a memene, which is a ritual practitioner of first fruit cutting. This is the first cutting of rice in the harvest. And the memene will say a certain set of orations to the spirits. The little girl who's standing to the side is her daughter and is learning to do this. This is a kanduli being prepared. The kanduli is the ritual that they do 4 times a year. They're cooking rice actually in those bamboo tubes, and they're cooking special rice that they grew in their ritual plot in their swiddens. And I won't try to describe the nature of the whole kanduli to you, but it's a meal in which by the time it's over, because of the way they do it ritually, everybody has eaten some rice out of every swidden they've worked on, and everybody has given some of their rice to everyone who worked on their swidden. This is Mo Santos. Mo Santos is a specialist in hunting for wild pigs with dogs, a very courageous form of hunting. He'll go into the forest with a set of dogs, and the dogs will corner a wild boar or a wild pig, And Los Santos has to kill that animal from up close with a spear. And it takes tremendous amount of courage and is not something that all men do. Interesting thing about, and then after it's killed, other men from the village come and carry the pig back to the community where it's cut up. Now, the men who carry the pig back get the head as a reward for their labor in carrying the pig in a big sling. The rest of the pig is cut up into exactly the identical packets of meat. So much hind legs, so much ribs, so much this, so much that, so much liver, so much equal number of packets as there are families in the community, and each family gets a packet. All that the hunter gets for because that's his specialty that he does for the community, all that he gets, other than his family's packet, is a little strip from the chest of the pig, which is thought to be mystical, to have to do with courage. He gets that. So basically, it's a very clear model of how the specializations are done for the community and not just for the person who does them. This is a woman who's fishing for little fry that come up the river along the side of the bank, and she scoops them up and puts them into her basket, little tiny fish. The river is a tremendous source of food. It's a big river, and it's a tremendous source of food. The eating with Duna and Yantu, they were never quite sure what I would eat. And so I remember one night we had just a few vegetables and some rice, and it was raining out, and they said, "It's a pity you don't eat shrimp because there's so many shrimp." And I said, "I love shrimp." They said, "You eat shrimp?" I said, "Sure." So the young fellow in the family went out and came back with about 50 or 60 prawns, and we had this most marvelous prawn meal. When the flooding begins, these fish traps are made to work at that time. And the flooding begins, and the fish are carried over this ramp, this ramp here, to onto the sort of inclined ramp beyond it, where the fishermen standing on either side of the structure grab the fish, hit them with the larger fish with a mallet, a club, to stun them, and then put them in their basket. What struck me about the Teduray was their sort of spiritual vision. I mentioned that they were egalitarian, and they felt that nobody ranked over anybody else, not even animals. I mean, people don't rank over animals. You can't just go kill a monkey. You have to have an oration to the spirits of monkeys and sort of say that we need food, but we thank you for your life. And no one has just a right to go killing things, or for that matter, to cut down rice. You have to thank the spirits for the gift of rice. Absolute egalitarianism. And the way they believed that equals should live with each other was cooperatively, not competitively. This is a young shaman who is doing a curing. Again, the people playing gongs. He's curing that little baby, little child. This happened to take place when Audrey and the boys were visiting me once. Audrey was convinced this little kid would die. We thought he had pneumonia. They did this curing ceremony. Now that young shaman there will have gone to sleep the night before and have gone into the spirit world and found the spirit that was offended by the child, that made it sick, will have done a kind of legal settlement with the spirit to make everything okay again, and then be told what it takes to make the child well. In this case, it was to rub it with some oil of a certain kind. So the shaman is now doing that and playing sort of jingle bells, which is a shamanic tool. And in a couple days, the child was completely better. We thought it would die for sure, but it was completely better. Specialties in Teduray life, unless it's one like having children, which is a specialty of women that men can't participate in, but most specialties are open to both men and women as part of their egalitarian view of things. So both men and women were legal specialists, both men and women were shamans, both men and women were basket weavers, both men and women do all sorts of things. Everyone lived the same way. The shamans all farmed the same as everyone else. The legal specialists farmed the same as everyone else. They all lived in small houses. They always said that the ranking, putting people above other people in society was no way to live. Now, if a woman's husband dies when she's younger, she will get a new husband given to her by the group through their legal system. But if an older woman's husband dies, she sometimes is given as a second wife to her sister's husband or her cousin's husband. And that's what happened in this case. The older woman, the woman to the right, her husband was Balaud's brother. And he died, and so she just became Balaud's wife so that she would have someone to help take care of her. Now this is a very interesting story that goes along with this picture. The Teduray make their own musical instruments. They don't make the gongs. Metal they don't do, but bamboo instruments they make themselves. And one of the instruments they make is called a togo belatokan, which is this bamboo zither. You cut grooves into the bamboo and put in bridges and lift up the little string that is cut out. And there's 8 strings on it, and it sounds a bit like a harp when it's played. It's very beautiful, and they played beautiful music on it. And I was very struck by their music, and in the evenings when they would play music, I would sit and listen to them play. And they would play these different musical instruments and dance and sing. And they realized I was so interested in the Togo Belatokan because it was so beautiful, and they said to me, "You should hear Ika play." Ika is a woman who lives several mountains away in another community, but she's the best Togo Belatokan player among the Teduray. And I said I would like to hear her play. Now, they have this principle that if someone wants something, they do everything they can to achieve that. That's to give me a good gallbladder. So sure enough, about 2 weeks later, Ika showed up. Someone had gone to her community and said, "We've got this Molini down here who's living with us, would like to hear you play." And she came and stayed about 2 weeks. And she played every night, during the day worked with the other women, and then played at night. Now, when she was playing, she came with her brother. And I was interested because her name is not Idang Ika, say, which would mean mother of someone, which is the typical name of a Teduray adult, but was just Ika, which is a child's name, an unmarried child's name. So I asked, and she had come with her brother, I asked whether she had a husband. And they said to me, "Oh no, Molini, she can't have a husband. She's a Mantafuale Libun, which means she is one who became a woman." So I said, "Oh, so she's really a man." Now in Teduray, we were talking in Teduray, of course. There's a way of saying someone is really something, like this is not fake. This is really a squash. And that's Tintu. She is a Tintu Libun. She's a real woman. So I said, "But you said she became a woman." "Yes, she was born a boy, but she became a woman." "So then she's not a real woman," said I. "No, she's a real woman." So I was quite confused by all this, and finally I asked, "Does she have a penis?" "Well, of course she has a penis. She's a Mantafuale Libun. How many times do we have to tell you, Molini, that?" And so it finally came through to me that they have a different way, the Teduray have a different way of determining what you really are than we do. We sort of go by one's genitals or one's plumbing. They go by what role you play. If you want to, and they have this principle, which is again part of their egalitarianism, that if you would were born a boy and would rather be a woman, well, be a woman. That's okay. If you're born a woman and would rather be a man, well, be a man. That's fine. And so they have Mantafuale Libun and Mantafuale Lage, one who became a woman, one who became a man. This is Moligaya. Moligaya was a wonderful person. I enjoyed him very much. He was a man of about 40 years old or 45 years old. I mentioned that people had specialties. And when I asked Moligaya what his specialty was, he said his specialty was molamfa, which is the word for eloping with another woman, other than your wife. And it turns out that the Teduray nuclear family, while it's of great importance to them in their society, and whenever one breaks up, they form another one immediately, so people are never without a husband and wife being together. Nevertheless, those nuclear families are very fragile, and Teduray are forever running off with each other's spouses. When a man has his wife stolen, say, someone runs off with a person's spouse, that man will be very, very angry and want to do violence. So the whole community will settle in to support him in his anger. They will say, yes, of course you feel angry, and that was a terrible thing that was done to you. They'll let him express fully his anger, but always with the caveat, but don't do violence. Don't pick up your spear and go after them. And when he's calmed down, it's turned over to the legal system to be settled in a nonviolent way. Now this is a tiawan. This is a legal session. Men and women who are legal sages gather in a circle and discuss an offense that was done to somebody, or the making of a marriage, or the remaking of a divorce and a remarriage, whatever sort of is troubling the community. I think the reason the legal system is so successful is because it's actually subtle. It's hard to put this into a few words, but the results of legal cases are that the people who have been injured are publicly vindicated in a very public way. The wrong that has been done them is acknowledged. This is the last slide I have. The ultimate fate of this tribal group was to have the forest all cut down around it. Logging companies would bulldoze logging roads into the forest, clear cut, just cut down all the trees, put them on trucks and drive them out. The result was that the Teduray culture was losing its home, and the lowlanders had no concern about this. As far as they were concerned, these were upland Hicks and Rubes, and they didn't care about what happened to them. The entire forest had been broken into franchises that had been given to logging companies. So by today, there's almost no forest left. The Teduray people have almost all been changed into a kind of version of Philippine lowland peasants. Their old traditions are gone. The traditional way of life that I found so beautiful is gone. 1972, early in 1972, I got a phone call from Hamilton Edwards, a good friend of mine in the area, who had followed my work with the Teduray very closely. Hamilton himself is half Teduray, half American. And he called to say that the people of Figal, men, women, and children, all of them had been massacred in a massacre by Muslim guerrillas who had come into the area, into the forest, hiding from the government. At that time the Muslims were in a war of rebellion against the Philippine government. And they had tried to rip off the Figal people for food and for their women. Now the Figal people would have by nature just been glad to feed them and would have given them everything that they could. But when they tried to take their women and use them sexually, That, in Teduray eyes, is slave taking. And in their view, that's the one justification for using violence, is to protect yourself against that. So they fought back, and they fought back with blowguns and homemade shotguns and bows and arrows, things like that. And the Muslim guerrillas had assault weapons, and they just blew them away, is what I understand and heard happened. In my book, Wisdom from a Rainforest, I refer to American culture as an NFL culture, and that we're very competitive and very violent and very power crazy and very ranked. And in almost point by point, American society doesn't share the well springs of this very peaceful, graceful, gracious life that I was experiencing in the forest. And I felt sad about that. I reflected on my own upbringing and how much competition was drummed into me, and how much violence in the schoolyards, and how much homophobia and things of that sort had been part of my upbringing. And I felt sad about it. One of the reasons I wanted to write the book I wrote was because I wanted to show Americans that there was another way than the way we take for granted as being reality. There is another way that we can organize.